And we're back. This month, we are discussing the new nutrition guidelines that were released by the federal government. And some of the things that came out around the guidelines were a new motto, quote, eat real food. And then they appeared to invert the old pyramid. Even South Park made a joke about this in the past that now it seems to have come to light. A lot of the things that I've seen within the new guidelines seem to echo things that people would say as social media nutrition influencers, things like, oh, all sugar is bad. And they even added a piece that said, quote, to help identify sources of added sugars, look for ingredients that include the word sugar or syrup or end in ose, end quote. That was on page 5 of the Dietary Guidelines. So to discuss the guidelines, I brought back on Abby Chan. Abby is a registered dietitian based out of Arizona. Abby, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat about it. Yeah, so as you mentioned, the dietary guidelines for Americans were released, and they're released every 5 years. And what that means is that we get this ideally, like evidence based group of guidelines of how we should be eating. And I want to note first and foremost, I think it's only 9 or 10% of Americans actually follow dietary guidelines. So there's not much of us that do. There's not much of us that ever have. So to say that they were totally wrong before and that it's a big overhaul just is actually pretty inaccurate because most people weren't following them. But the thing that does matter is what they form and what they form and basically how they form change within different schools, hospital systems sometimes. Say it's even jails or, social programs, things like that. All the dietary guidelines form and shape what is then allowed to be served within those spaces. So even though you may not follow them, even though other people may not, I think that that's the context that really matters.
Right. So it sounds like these are very macro level policy focused guidelines. These are meant for organizations to design programs, not so much for the average consumer to go around and figure out how they're going to shop for what they want to put in their fridge.
Well, actually, our guidelines have been pretty good for a long time. And that's the thing is not much has changed within the old guidelines to what we have now and the ones that were just released. So not much has really changed. So given that, it should actually, if people did eat by the dietary guidelines, then yeah, we would have pretty well balanced, nutrient rich, dense diets. And we would have 15 years ago, we would have 5 years ago, we would have them now. It's just that people don't do it. And I think that's an interesting thing as well. Not much of the information and data has changed in these guidelines. The marketing around it has changed a lot. And so I think that's one of the big pros and cons of both of it, whereas I think historically the government has not been very good about talking about and being able to talking about change and, all the things that they're doing and how do we actually apply these into a consumer friendly format. Typically the guidelines were, I think they were about 100 pages long. The most recent ones, they were about like 10 pages, anywhere from, 40 pages to 10 pages. And then there's a bunch of appendices, which are hundreds of pages long. And so most people aren't going to sit through and read those. And so ideally they are for individuals and they also shape public programs.
So it's a mix of both.
It's a mix of both. And that's the thing is where I think they did do a good job at, getting their message across. They hired a really great marketing firm. I'm sure they had a lot of really great graphics around it, which is helpful because we don't actually have a very high literacy rate in the US. So it is easier to get information across. And also their media and marketing around it is not actually what's in the guidelines.
So is that one of the I wanted to get into what you see as the good, the bad, and the ugly for these new guidelines. Is that one of the pros is that they tried to simplify it in a way that was, I hate to use the word digestible as a pun here, but is that a positive within this?
One of them is, they say eat real food. I'm like, yeah, we've been saying that forever. So it's not new, but they've really gotten a lot of momentum around that. So I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. We apparently didn't communicate it very well before because also eating foods that are nutrient rich, quote unquote whole foods, like isn't sexy. So yeah, so I think that overall, like, I don't know. Hold on, I'm echoing and it's really distracting to me.
It might be my end.
Yeah, that's better. Okay. Oh, I can't hear you now.
It's my mic. I'm gonna tap mute. It's because the headphone situation. My bad, Abby.
Okay.
So I'll mute when you go ahead. So yeah, I'll just mute now.
Okay. So wait, ask me the question one more time.
Yeah. So with the guidelines, looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly, it sounds like from a communication standpoint, they've tried to simplify it, and that's a positive with the message of eat real food. Even though that's not new, they really tried to, from what I can see, harp on that more. And it sounds like that's a pro from your perspective, but I'm open to hearing anything pushing back on that. What else within looking at the new guidelines would you see as a pro or a con or any good, bad, or ugly things that you see sticking out to you?
So one of the things that they've really promoted is ending the war, quote unquote, on protein and saturated fats. One, first and foremost, we've never had a war on protein. I think this even where it gets to a little bit more like political ideology, where generalizing, but the left is seen more as environmentally conscious, which also means that maybe their food choices are going to be in a shifting away towards like certain things that are more environmentally costly, versus a more conservative leaning individual is going to be more so in like standard American diet type things. And so I think one of the things is that they really stated that there was a war on these things when there never was. Additionally, they're really promoting saturated fats, but when you actually look at the guidelines, that recommendation hasn't changed. So before it was less than 10% of your calories coming from saturated fat. Now it's 10%. So real semantics there. But they're stating that instead, you should be eating a lot of saturated fats. You should be using beef tallow and butter and all of these things. And this kind of comes from this aspect of the like Maha movement around seed oils. And what they do say is like, eat seeds, eat nuts, eat all these other things. But that difference between butter and beef tallow and all of that really goes down, not even in the guidelines, but more around some of the other cultural messaging around it, where seed oils have been deemed as this horrible thing. And when we really boil it down to all of the research, when we reduce saturated fat intake and increase our mono and polyunsaturated fat intake and basically replace those, we do see cardiovascular benefits in that, across the board. If we are then reducing our saturated fat intake and replacing it with something that is maybe a more refined sugar or refined carbohydrate, then we start to see other health complications. So it's just a lot of nuance there. But what they're saying is, eat all these things high in saturated fat. And that's not actually matching up with what we can do in real life to meet first our overall dietary fat needs. If we're supposed to only get 10% from saturated fats, then we are then woefully undernourished from a essential fatty acid standpoint, because they're saying do this, but we actually can't get enough if it's only 10% of our diet.
So just to make sure I'm following along,
Yeah.
the original guidelines were that, hey, less than 10% is ideal. And now the current guidelines are around 10%. But at the same time, they're also saying that they want you to have all these foods that are higher in saturated fats. Is that following along correctly?
Exactly. Yeah. So they're saying eat all of these foods that are higher in saturated fat. But when you break it down to our dietary fat needs, where it's 20 to 30% of your diet, we actually can't get enough from all the things they're saying we should be eating if you're then excluding other mono and polyunsaturated fats.
So it's narrowing the options.
It's narrowing the options. And if you actually followed them, which again, most people don't, then you would be likely undernourished from a fatty acid standpoint. So
The devil's in the details, it sounds like.
always. And then I think another thing that's actually really neutral, would be they increase the recommendations for protein to 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. For my population, That's fine. I mostly work with athletes and people who have either disordered eating or things like that. So I'm working with a population where it's harder for them to meet their needs for a variety of reasons. And also, as we get older, we do see that we need more dietary protein coming in because our digestive systems aren't as good at breaking protein down so that our body can actually absorb it. So that one's really neutral to me. I don't really care. Also, no one is really deficient in protein. That's actually pretty rare, specifically in the United States. We actually get way more protein typically overall as a population than, the zero 0.8 grams per kilogram, which it was before. So that one to me is really neutral. That's not going to be enough to cause harm. It's not in the realms of like 2.2, 2.5, 3 grams per kilogram to where it's like, okay, what are we doing here? So that one's neutral. I don't really care. People are already doing that.
I guess my final question to be or would be, what should the average person take away from this? Do they start buying more of the foods that they see on the graphics? Should they just keep doing what they're doing? Obviously it's case by case, but what would you, if someone's sitting with you and they're saying, "Hey, I have 2 minutes left to chat with you, Abby," what should this boil down to for takeaways?
Good question. I wouldn't get caught in the weeds when it comes to the seed oil aspect. I think there's a lot of foods that are really health promoting. Example, roasted nuts, really health promoting. But I've had people where they're like, oh, I can't have those because they have a little bit of peanut oil. And I'm like, well, when you look at the nutrition facts, technically they're the same. And so I would say don't get caught in the weeds. If something is nutrient dense and you're like, this is like a healthy food, then I'm like, go for it. We need to remember in all of this context that the dose makes the poison. Additionally, I think definitely getting a significant amount of fiber. And so, where does fiber come from? Fiber comes from carbohydrates, which then breaks down into either fiber or starches or sugar. And so, we do need a good amount of fiber, and specifically the place where we're going to get enough fiber to meet our dietary needs because I think it's only like, I don't know, it's a very small amount of people who get enough fiber in our country. If you're not eating carbohydrates, starchy vegetables, whole grains, it's going to be really hard to get enough fiber for digestive health, for cardiovascular health, for all of these things. So adding fiber can be really essential. Eating, just even like frequently eating enough. Don't let the overwhelm of all of the noise from social media, from our government, from everything else that's muddling what we should be doing. Don't let that totally paralyze you. In my opinion, something's always better than nothing. And then I think a lot of the things that are coming out of this administration, just in general, is really challenging because, there's aspects where we are looking at, okay, eat more protein, eat more saturated fats. These foods are inherently more expensive. Food is not getting any cheaper. And then there's other things that are coming up that are actually more challenging, specifically in the guidelines where we see, they reduce the overall alcohol intake limits on there and they're like, just do less. And we know that alcohol is a known carcinogen. And so I think that there's just a lot of conflict within these, and we can even see individuals who are making these recommendations really wrestling with it and trying to like do some mental gymnastics around it. So I would say just don't get caught in all the noise. Eat regularly. Eat fruits and vegetables, yes. Eat whole grains. Eat starchy vegetables. Eat a wide variety of protein. That includes beans. That doesn't just mean meat. And yeah, and if you are really confused by this, find a dietitian.
Yeah, I can't recommend that last point enough. But yeah, I think that's a great takeaway set for people to hone in on and possibly pause and replay that. Abby, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Colin.